So we're here to talk about how to get the most out of your SCOM environment by taking the alert noise and actually getting action. Really just joining SCOM and ITIL together. And it's presented by myself, Nathan, and Matt. Start with a quick intro here. I have been in IT for about 20 years. Over 10 of those have been with SCOM. And during that time, I also worked with Squared Up and Cookdown, which you might have seen come across once in a while for SCOM products and integrations into ITIL. So it's an area that I'm familiar with and enjoy. And currently, I'm working at Roller as a senior software engineer for venue management.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Crichton. I've been working in IT for around 25 years now. I've worked in quite a few different industries, including defence, Premier League football, financial sector, aerospace, and for Microsoft themselves. I'm mainly an infrastructure and operational specialist, working a lot with Windows Server, SCOM, and ITIL type products such as ServiceNow. And I've been a Squared Up customer since version 2.
Exciting. And then helping us with the demo from Squared Up is Ashley.
Hey folks, so my IT career started on a support desk for SCOM, so I've known nothing else. 10 years of my career for the most part have actually been at Squared Up itself, so hopefully from that experience I can share quite a lot. I've been using Squared Up since version 2 as well, so very early days.
Yeah, which makes this an exciting talk. We'll kind of walk through in the SCOM trenches for those that have had scary moments per se related to SCOM. And the first thing I think we've all probably seen is that an uncomfortable truth is your alerts might be being ignored, but it's not necessarily SCOM that's the problem. I think this is something Matt's run into in his implementations.
Yeah, so I think everyone can kind of understand when I say that SCOM is just a sea of bad news. If you open up the console, it can be a little bit terrifying and quite daunting to those that are not familiar with it and familiar with how the alerting works and kind of things like alert churn where things come and go every day. The danger that we have with this is that you'll find some sort of management team will say to you that they just want alerts for everything. And then what happens is you end up in this scenario where you just get a flood of noise that you see in the SCOM console reflected in emails. And then what happens then is people create rules for emails and they become emails that they just ignore. And people just get fatigued by it. And there's just no one owns the outcome. Nothing ever gets fixed because they just end up ignoring it all.
Yeah, and exactly to that, nobody owns the outcome. Back at C.H. Robinson, we used to have, and you try to avoid, but you'd end up with finger pointing because you knew an alert went out. So as a SCOM operator, we know we detected something and we've all seen it there. But once it leaves, if no one owns it, how do you know that operations are getting back online? And that, I think it's a pain many of us have seen, which leads well on to our next topic is email blindness. And everyone sees it a little differently. I've definitely seen it frequently as email rules, which actually means you never see them. Once someone sets one of those up, they hide forever. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, this is I guess why we're here. This is what we want to talk about really. It's trying to get that joined up thinking between something alerting and telling you it's broken and something actually being actioned and ultimately being fixed. And this is where sort of any of you that are familiar with sort of ITIL practices and products such as ServiceNow, BMC Remedy, and sort of similar platforms really, this is where kind of the ownership model sort of comes into play. And this is why we want to talk about this today, is because these ITIL centric platforms, as I say, like ServiceNow, they can help SCOM administrators really with ownership of alerts and getting things fixed. If you're just punting out emails, they are just going to get ignored, unfortunately, and you can tune them to your heart's content, but ultimately there's just no ownership. That things will just go to a email box somewhere and they'll just get ignored. Whereas if you can align them to sort of ITIL practices and to ticketing systems, then you will find that because people have to take ownership of something because they'll have an incident created for it, then suddenly things will get resolved.
Yeah, and personally, I actually found it more comfortable being the one raising the alerts with that ITIL system back there, as you're not chasing people, because it always feels like, as the SCOM admin, when you know that something's broken and it's not been acted upon, you kind of feel like you need to go out there and chase it. But yeah, using these systems, we're going to look into ServiceNow in a little bit, but gets that incident behind it, which means you've got the SLA enforcement, you've got ownership, and you've got management buy-in to make sure that those SLAs are met.
Yeah, you know that any kind of management is going to be running reports on the ITIL platform to see how quickly things are getting resolved, looking at different CIs, different configuration items, so like a server, a database that's generating the most amount of instance, and as you say, Nathan, that all ties into things like SLAs.
Yeah, which is perfect, ties into ignoring alerts. We're going to kind of beat this horse to death, but it is the key of this whole session, is that if you have too many alerts, they won't get actioned, and it's just a mess. We've got here a couple of the same things, but you get missed outages, repeated incidents. Matt had mentioned CIs. We'll talk about that in a second, but without getting tracking in there, it's hard to even see what's been repeated, and that credibility decline.
Yeah, it's just a simple picture, really. It just depicts the fact that, you know, you get a sea of alerts, and the one that actually really matters, it's just hard to spot.
Wow. So let's look a little at how this flow might actually work if we're selling it. So what is something, I guess, you've set up in the past, Matt, to actually get ITIL into this flow? And then I can talk a little about cookdown as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's we keep talking about ITIL. Obviously, it's just a practice. It's a framework that most businesses around the world try to adhere to some sort of shape or form, and it's certainly something that's worth any SCOM administrator taking, even at a foundational level, because it just helps you understand a bigger picture. It's too easy for a SCOM admin to just focus on the kind of thing that's in front of them, which is the alerts and the configuration and the management packs and that side of it. But if you can get more aligned to sort of operational readiness and things like the way that the business actually thinks and functions, then ultimately you'll get better traction with your alerts, because you'll tie all these things together. And that whole ITIL event management alert lifecycle process is basically what we're talking about today, and how you can align those two things together.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the idea for cookdown came as well. So you've got the events on the left side, which are the noise from SCOM, or just the data points. But once you start to collect those, you can correlate them and you create incidents. And as those build up, it gives you a better picture. You have multiple incidents, can help you point to a problem, which helps you find root causes, things that happen frequently, a good place to spend your time. And it also starts to link into change management, as I would think most people could probably vouch for. Changes do on occasion and sometimes frequently cause the problems that we see. And so as we get these items linked into CIs, we'll see in the demo that if you can surface that right next to the alert, it can make it quite a bit easier to get the fix in quick and reduce downtime.
I guess the importance of the CMDB and having CIs properly maintained is just that bigger picture, the bigger understanding that if you've got an incident or an alert, well, something that starts off as an alert ends up as an incident for a particular server, it's understanding the impacts. And things like ServiceNow are very, very good at enabling you to create those relationships between the CIs, between the databases, and then the servers, and then the cluster partners, and then ultimately map it all the way up to the application and platform tier, and being able to see at this level what is impacted further up the chain is just an important part of that.
Yeah, and this is just a simple visual for that, but changing that noise on the left from a bunch of items into a few smaller items, but with more meaning, is what makes, ops effective.
Yeah, and it's just all about controlling the flow of alerts, which ultimately become incidents. We talked about not wanting to get, there you go, perfect example. We talked about not wanting to have too many emails as alerts. You also want the sort of the same thing really within the ITIL tool as well. You don't want too many incidents, because you'll just have the same problem as you had previously, but you'll just, instead of being an email, it'll be sat in your incident queue instead. And the important thing is to control how many alerts are turned into incidents, because else you'll just end up with incident blindness instead of email blindness, and so you'll just shift the problem from one platform to another.
Yeah, and when we brainstormed on ways, how can you get through this, different things that we've seen in the past, 3 good ways to start kind of came up. So you've got the human triage, which if you're a 24/7 shop, works great. You get things, someone takes a look, and then they can escalate items that are more important up to incidents. They can bring those down. It does give you the highest control, but also at the highest cost for time and highest cost for just like human time, as well as time to get it out. The next one was automating it with guardrails. And if you can automate on high confidence items only, that's great. One of the ones we used to automate on were things like heartbeat failure and server down, because that gives you a decent idea that everything on that server is offline. They're fairly rare, and you can deduplicate all of the tickets under it. So in the case of what we had done in some of the monitoring I've done, if a SQL server goes down, all the services on it you can just suppress to that same incident, because of course the service is off, the ping has stopped, and all of that relates. And then hybrid, if you want to go through that, Matt, I think that's a good mix of both. Is there any examples you've come across? Or?
Yeah, so I mean, depending on which route you take this, very much depends on the type of business you are and the size of the business. As Nathan says, the human triage side of it is I guess in some ways the best, but it comes at a huge cost. So ultimately some sort of hybrid and sort of semi-automated sort of process is what you really would want to strive for, I guess. It's very easy to take alerts of a particular type with semi-automation and send them to a particular incident queue. So let's say, for example, you've got a team which purely deals with database issues. Send all the SQL incidents to them, nice and easy. If you've got a team that deals with certificates, again, it's relatively easy. When you've got this mixed bag of different teams being responsible for different servers, then things get a little bit more complex, because you can't necessarily isolate something by a particular class in SCOM in quite the same way. Because if you've got like a database team and not only look after the databases but the database servers themselves, but then you've got a dedicated server team for kind of everything else, and it can be a little bit tricky to automate it sort of fully. So that's why a hybrid model, I guess, is the sort of the best blend of the other two.
Perfect. And then the most exciting bit, well, we should probably actually show it working. And Ash is available to help us with some of the latest features. Our demo is going to run through the squared up UI, as they host SCOM-a-thon, and it's a UI we're familiar with, but it is still the same data you'd see in the alerts, the raw data. And then we're going to kind of look through at the like a ServiceNow perspective. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit of how you could filter and compress those, as well as how some of those features came about. I'll let you share your screen, Ash, and then we can take it from there.
Perfect. Yeah, let me just share there. Cool. Just wait for Teams to catch up. Okay, so in the context of Squared Up, as Nathan alluded to, right, this is our pretty UI that makes SCOM, much easier to use. Whether you're looking at an alert view, whether you're looking at a server view, this could even be, an application. Really does sort of depend on how you use SCOM. This NOC dashboard, at a very high level, is just a summary of alerting. This could be filtered down to a particular team. It could be filtered down to a particular infrastructure or application. Really just ensuring that context is there for whoever's going to be consuming that data is very important. But let's just take an example of an alert. So here in the list, we can see right now we've got an issue with an application pool that's part of a web server. And if I just expand this high level context from the monitoring that we've got in place, you can see this telling us that there's a problem with the application pool. When we want to learn more, we then go to the drill down. So we can just very simply click into the alert, and straight away we can see what this actually relates to. So this application pool back up to the actual IS web server and the server that hosts it, and also importantly any applications that this affects as well. So this is actually the front end of a web application that we host for our demonstrations here. Now, really importantly, if we want to raise that within ServiceNow, we can trigger this. In this environment, we've actually set this to be manually triggered via a resolution state. So very simply, we've just called this send it to Snow. And then when I hit update, that's now actually going to fire it off into ServiceNow using Cookdown Connection Center. That is going to take a moment, so I'll just talk about some more views that we have available whilst that's ticking along in the background. But the context is what we wanted to dig into. So if we now look at the server itself in the context of Squared Up, by drilling in, we can start to evaluate the information from the monitoring, but more importantly, in the topic of focus today, is actually from the ITSM side of things. So through this ServiceNow view, we're actually looking at the CMDB asset information. So here we've just listed off some key information around what this object actually is, who owns it, the version for whatever reason we might want to display that. And we're also showing our open instance and changes currently as well. So immediately from the alert, I can drill down here and I can see, oh, well, actually we closed a change recently. Perhaps that change has negatively affected the performance of the server. That may actually be what's causing that alerting at that point in time. So very quickly, we can start to build up this sort of view of what's happened within the environment to actually have caused this issue. We can also drill out from here as well. So if I wanted to drop into that change just by clicking in here, if I wanted to drop into an open change that's currently in progress, we can very simply do that. But I could also just drill into the asset itself, and then that's going to take me through to the CMDB, where typically we're going to have more properties than what we've exposed on that sort of simple view that we saw a moment ago. So here we have, the make and model, CPU memory, all of the good stuff that we'd expect to be stored in the CMDB. And what I can also do from here is obviously take a look at the instance themselves. So we have a table here that's part of the Connection Center suite, which is actually showing us the incident that's been raised. So we can see the application pool is unavailable. We can see the object that's generated, when it was updated, the current resolution state. And by drilling into the incident, were I coming at this from the ITSM side of things, I now have access to all of the information from SCOM. So the description, any of the key properties, and again, I can kind of drill down into the CI as well to learn more. So how that actually benefits you is, you've gone from an alert generated in SCOM, potentially some monitoring data that will help you to understand what's actually happened, all the way through to actually looking at the CI and saying, well, this belongs to this particular team, this application, who do I need to reach out to actually go and investigate? And how you actually route the alerts then is obviously quite important as well. So from here, you can manually provide an assignment group, or part of the Connection Center side of things. You can also create rules that would evaluate the information from SCOM. So it would look at, the management pack that's generated this particular alert and say, this is based on the IIS monitoring, so that needs to go to the web team, or perhaps there's SQL information there, and that actually goes off to the DB team to investigate. So very quickly, you go from an alert in SCOM right the way through to actually getting it passed to the people who are going to need to go and investigate and actually resolve that issue.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think it's a perfect example. I liked how slick it just goes from step to step to step as Ash was running through it. But even looking here and on the previous screen when we were looking at the server, we had a lot more information of where it sat in the business, which is kind of what we had been harping on before on getting a CI attached. And we also had information on changes on what had recently happened. So it builds out that picture quite a bit. There's some fun backstory with Cookdown and how some of these features came about. We'll go into how you could do this on your own, but initially it was just a send items over, get everything over, and working with Matt must have been 5-6 years ago now. We looked at options and thought, well, you know what we need to do? That SCOM alerts table that Ash had showed there, we should actually create a way to look at that and say, join these. So if we take a look back at ServiceNow, there's a item in there called a creation rule that comes with part of the Cookdown suite. But this is actually where you say, you know what, instead of having a manual flip, instead of having someone have to go in and say send alert to SCOM, maybe we send them all, and let's just do a couple checks across conditions. So you look through and say, okay, everything can come up, but we're going to make sure that the object name contains SQL, it's from the SQL management pack, and it seems silly, but it's not closed, because everyone's gotten the second half of the alert storm when it click flaps, and you're like, well, I didn't even need this. So we check for all of those, and then down below you just say, yeah, this is important. Let's make it and assign it to the database team down there on the assignment group. And now that team actually gets an ITSM correlated event created into an incident that they can track. Any information, like any stuff on your side, kind of when we built that out, Matt? I was trying to remember back 5 years ago. It's still working the same, but
if you go back to the server in Squared Up for me, Ash, I guess there's a few things to point out here. Really, is that the post-processing rules in ServiceNow are incredibly powerful, and this is why we sort of approached Nathan for the business I worked for at the time to sort of see if there's a sort of slightly different way that we could do stuff. And this is where we kind of came up with this idea between us of this staging table, which is called SCOM alerts in ServiceNow, because essentially it just ends up as being a dumping ground for the SCOM instance that you create, and then the post-processing rules within ServiceNow then, as Nathan was just discussing, decide where it goes. And we kind of went a little bit further than that. So Ash demonstrated just now that he used a resolution state to send it to ServiceNow. And what we actually did was we actually created multiple resolution states within SCOM, which obviously manifest in ServiceNow, and they were basically for all of our key teams. So we had one that said send incident to server team, one that said send incidents to database team, send one to networks, and so on and so forth. And using those processing rules that Nathan was just discussing, it then basically put it into the correct bucket, if you like, within ServiceNow without anyone then having to touch it. So it was that initial kind of triage from Squared Up or SCOM, which meant that the incident was then automatically created in ServiceNow. And I guess it's probably prudent to point out there, as we can see on this page of Ash's here, is that the incident number gets written back to SCOM and therefore Squared Up as well, and it's important to have that information available to you, because you can see that the incident number that's generated in ServiceNow comes back and it gets appended to the alert. Yeah, and ultimately that's what you want. You want that joined up thinking, you want that joined up logic. It's probably worth mentioning as well that SCOM's got the ability to automatically close these instances for you too. So in the case of something like a disk space alert, because someone's cleaned up some disk space, or a CPU alert that's dropped below a certain threshold, as SCOM recognizes that alert state is changed to healthy, you can actually be told to go to ServiceNow and close the incident for you, which sort of helps you keep on top of stuff, and actually helps with the kind of the day-to-day alert chain that you can get in SCOM as well, because we've all seen it before where you can make someone aware of something and then 5 minutes later it's decided it's kind of okay again, and that's particularly important over things like an evening, a night, a weekend, or whatever. You can end up with lots of emails being created or sent out, which are kind of there for people to pick up on the Monday morning, and that's how you then get this massive backlog, this massive kind of sea of bad news, I guess, in your email alerts. Whereas having this Cookdown connector, which joins SCOMs and ServiceNow together, it actually helps you keep on top of those incidents, because anything that SCOM has detected as being being healthy again gets automatically closed, which saves you a job. Which means, you know, ultimately what you're left with in your incident queue is the ones which are still legitimately still a problem, and that's kind of where you want to be focusing every day, I guess, as well. Going back to that server page, I guess it's worth just calling out again just about the importance of being able to see the sort of the changes that a server that's about to be involved in and changes that was previously involved in as well. Because, you know, if you come in the morning and you see you've got a load of alerts and you see that the server, the CI was in a change sort of the night before, you know, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's kind of probably related, especially if your network team's been involved anywhere I used to work. And things like, you know, things like Windows patching as well, you know, that can have an impact on things as well, and often can generate lots of incidents, lots of alerts the next day. And having that information kind of available at your fingertips, I think, is important, really, just for context, if nothing else. And you've got the ability to specify in here as well how far into the future and into the past you can list your changes. So, for example, where I used to work, we did 30 days into the future and 30 days into the past. And what that does mean is that people raising changes need to make sure that they properly add the CIs into the change, else you're never going to know that something's been involved in it. And that, you know, that goes as far as patching. ServiceNow is quite good. You can add literally 500,000 different CIs into a change automatically as well. Just import it from a table, and it means things can be kind of like populated automatically for you, which saves you a job.
Yeah, that's perfect. And well, Cookdown has a soft spot in my heart, and I'd like to keep harping on it. I'm actually going to go back to our slides here, and we're going to look at really what if you don't use Cookdown. I mean, I'll be a little hurt, but there are other solutions. So we thought we should talk about it just from a top-down kind of the process that we just saw and what's going on. So in the basics, in the plumbing, you've got SCOM generating all the noise. And the key thing here is you want quality data. So luckily, building from SCOM, things like NetBIOS name and FQDN, we've got some solid items for identifiers to work with. As you build out items in your environment, custom monitoring, you'll need to keep on top of that and make sure that quality stays good. And the staging pattern, the staging table pattern that we showed, it could also be as simple as a couple switch statements in a script. So we'll talk through the details in the next slide, but you're really just looking for a way to look at those raw alerts and do a little logic before you push them up. And then that second or that third stage is where your ITSM engine comes in. So we've talked all about ServiceNow here, but it could be Remedy, Jira Service Management, any of the other tools, Sharewell, I think I'd seen recently. They're all very similar. They have different function sets and different ways to apply them, but since they follow ITSM rules, they're all going to handle that once you get it up to them. So if you'd like to make a cheap and cheerful option, here's kind of what we had come up with as your steps. We'll trim that out of the audio. I'm trying to think of where to go.
I mean, yeah, I mean, this is kind of, I guess this is kind of the utopia, isn't it? This is your kind of your fully mapped out process. But, you know, it doesn't have to be this complex or this involved. You know, certainly if you've got the beauty of having things like SCOM and ServiceNow and a Cookdown connector, then you can do all of this end to end. But most ticketing systems will enable you to create incidents off the back of emails. So worst case, you can do things like create multiple resolution states in SCOM, have it send an email through to a ticketing system, and it's kind of a fire and forget, and you don't have the beauty of automatically closing alerts necessarily, but it gets you going with this process really, and it gets you away from just relying on people accessing the SCOM console or Squared Up to take ownership of stuff, because it shifts that focus into the ITSM tool, which, you know, any business you work in, management are going to be running reports on who's dealing with incidents, what incidents have we got, what's the trend like, what CIs are generating the most amount of incidents, all that kind of stuff. And it just means people just take a little bit more ownership, and that's what we're here for, really, is to talk about ownership. And it just means people are just a little bit more focused and aware, and actually try to get things fixed, because you don't want 100 incidents for the same thing week in, week out, because it's just not going to achieve anything, is it? It just forces people to kind of do the job properly, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And so if you wanted to bring something to your environment and try a cheap and cheerful DIY option, you could probably take many of these steps and jump into, Cloud Code or Cursor or something. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to pull SCOM. It's got a SDK that's pretty easy to use via PowerShell, and you'll map those fields. So this is where you're going to need a little of that internal knowledge. You're going to have to choose what fields go to your ITSM system. So team may become assignment group, may become owning team, and you'll map those, and then just have the filtering occur at that point. That's where you'd say, like, oh, for severity, drop everything that's not high, and then use PowerShell's the one I go back to, since it has the SDK and the commandlets for SCOM. Post it up to your ITSM system. So most of them have easy to use REST endpoints, great documentation, and that'll get it created. And you just step 4 there, just mark it in SCOM to say it's been processed. So the next time you return to step 1, you can see, like, oh, the state of it is sent to, ServiceNow, sent to Remedy, and you don't run through this again. And option 5 is optional, but I would recommend it because it's really nice to have logs when you come back to figure out what happened. And then you've got a couple things on the right here that are just good to keep in mind. The common routing levers are probably one that I'd bring to the top, and these are the items that you'll use when deciding what to post. So the resolution state's a big one we use frequently. Alert class, targeting things like server, gets you into a much more familiar space, and then using custom fields. And we've even got a checklist if you're trying to get this process in, because it can take a little work to get team buy-in. But we'd suggest you start with 5 alerts that you trust, that are always actionable. That way you know that these alerts that you filtered through your process actually mean something when they hit someone's desk, and take those alerts and get some valuable routing rules and ownership for it. The triage model won't shape what alerts you pick, but it will shape how you implement it. And then CI mapping we've included because we find it great. I think Matt had talked a bunch about that even in the demo there, that knowing what the configuration item is, what it belongs to, is important. It doesn't block the process if you can't. And then deduplication and correlation for noisy sources. My favorite on that is always IIS, because if you lose an IIS service, you get a ton of alerts for app pool down, site down, when really you just need to get an IIS or even possibly a Windows Server admin to bring that back up. And then slowly turn down the email as your workflow with those 5 to 10 alerts gets trusted. Anything across here, Matt or Ash, that you've seen in the past that you'd think would be other good checklist items that
I don't think there's anything to add to the checklist as such. It's just to talk about some of these points. I think you hit the nail on the head, really. That probably the most complicated one really is probably the ownership. And as a SCOM admin, you can't necessarily determine that for yourself. And this is why you have to have discussions with the relevant stakeholders across the business, really, at all different levels, not just infrastructure, but also operational as well, if that's how your business is geared up. I think most businesses that I've come across struggle with ownership more than anything else. It's determining whose problem something really is, and that's something you do need to kind of get nailed. which is why Nathan's approach of sort of starting small and sort of gradually growing it is the right approach, because pick the stuff in which you kind of almost know the owners, who the owners are going to be, really, I guess, in some ways, because it just helps you get buy into the whole process. It helps get you buy into the whole incident creation, the event lifecycle stuff, kind of ITIL, all that kind of thing. And we've talked about automation, we've talked about SDK connectors and all that kind of stuff, but if you've got a very, very clunky sort of ticketing system, you can just start off really simple and just copy paste stuff across. But it comes back to trying to do things, I guess, bit by bit, starting off small before you grow the processes, and define the processes as well. ITIL especially sort of needs you kind of to define these processes and get the processes agreed across the business, and people need to understand that these things are coming in and how it's going to work and what the expectation is around things like SLAs. And that's important as well, because different parts of the business may have different SLAs, and it's important to understand that as part of the bigger picture, really.
And I think, just to reiterate, the orange line on there, we've covered it a couple times, but if it's not owned, it's not actioned, just because it falls through the cracks too easily.
I think one of the mantras that I was taught early on also applies as well, which very simply, if an alert is triggered, you either fix it, you tune it, or you turn it off. And I think that, to your first point there, you need to trust the alerting.
That's a really good point, that if someone says, like, I won't do anything with it, turn it off is a valid action.
Yeah, I think if I had £1 for every time somebody asked me to turn off an alert, I would have retired by now. But my default response is, instead of me turning it off, how about you go fix it? Have an incident. There you go. That's kind of where you want to get to, really. Is just try and get people to take ownership of the stuff, take ownership of their own platforms. Obviously, there are times where you do need to turn stuff off in SCOM if it's truly not relevant, but have those sensible discussions with those product owners first and those platform owners. Don't just take their word for it. Kind of explore why they're getting those alerts and explore the validity of them before you do go turn them off. Because SCOM, generally speaking, doesn't lie. It's telling you things are happening in your environment, and there's a massive danger with turning off alerts because you're just sweeping stuff under the carpet, and you have to be careful of that.
Yeah, makes sense. So our catchy wrap and key takeaway is less noise, improve focus, create ownership, drive action. It does feel more like something that would be posted on LinkedIn than I would probably typically say, but I like the statement. Does it match kind of with what you guys have seen as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that because I wrote it, but yeah.
that is a good reason to agree with it. How about you, Ash?
Yeah, 100%.
I think I think it is simple. It is what it says, really. Try and help yourselves, help the situation by generating less noise to start off with, because less noise will ultimately improve focus. Improved focus will help people take ownership and ultimately drive action. It kind of is what it is, really. It is what it says on the tin.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Well, thank you for your time. For everyone joining this, we will be available for questions, hopefully. And thanks for joining us for this run through ITSM and connecting it to SCOM. We'll keep an eye on the SCOMs, or on the SCOM-a-thon Slack, that is. So post any questions you have in there. And it's definitely probably something other SCOM admins can chip in as well. So keep the conversation going, and hopefully we can pick up, tips from other admins.